Hey guys, I'm Dimension Jump and today I'll be talking about my favourite boss from every 3D Zelda game. Now, bosses in Zelda games are probably one of the best parts of a Zelda game. Another one might be dungeons or the side quests or the items that you might collect throughout your course of the journey. And I would say 3D Zelda boss fights are really fun, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. And if you're wondering what about the final boss, are there going to be any final bosses? Not in this video, but I will be releasing a video similar to this one in a few weeks when this video is released, so look out for that. And yeah, I'll go straight into it. So yeah, so from Ocarina of Time is Twin Rover. Now this fight is probably the most unique fight in Ocarina of Time because Twin Rover are these two witches, and I think they're called Kutane and Kuame, I believe, and they are the mothers of Ganondorf, and they both raised him. And what I like about this fight is that one is fire, one is ice, and in that boss fight you have to use their attacks on the opposite element. So if one fires fire, you have to use it on the ice one. If the other one uses ice, you have to use it on the fire one. So it's kind of like Fraz in Spirit Tracks, where his whole gimmick is ice and fire, and that's basically what Twin Rover is. And around about the halfway stage, Twin Rover, or both Kutame and Kuame, will both combine to become Twin Rover. Basically, just one singular being who can use both ice and fire, and you have to use your mirror shield that you collected in the temple where you fight Twin Rover to use their attacks against them. So they might do like fire, 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 or fire, ice, ice, and you have to like really think about which attack they're going to be using. And yeah, it's really one of those bosses that you have to really think about how to fight it, how to use like tactics against them, and which attack they're going to be using first. So yeah, from Majora's Mask is Twin Mold. Now with Twin Mold, I would say it's probably one of the best fights in Majora's Mask because you get to fight two bosses at once, similar to Twin Rover in Ocarina of Time, where that one you have to fight two witches with fire and ice powers. And with Twin Mold, I think it's a really cool fight because you have to fight these two giant centipede-looking monster enemy things, and depending on which version you play, whether there's the original or the 3DS version, the boss fight for Twin Mold varies, because in the original version, about I believe halfway through the dungeon of Stone Tower Temple, you get the Giant's Mask, which lets you become a giant and grows Link to the size of a giant, and it can use a sword to like hit both Twin Molds. And in the 3DS version, you have to use your bow and arrow to hit one of them, and then use the Giant's Mask to hit the other one. And both fights in both versions are cooler, or are cool and unique, but I think having to survive halfway through a battle to get a mask in the 3DS version can be quite tedious, because in the 3DS version, Twin Mold, like the other bosses, all have the giant eye gimmick, in the sense that his eyes, and then that's the boss fight. And I think the original version is probably better because you can use your sword and you can just wail on your attacks on the enemy. But in the 3DS version, when you do get the Giant's Mask halfway through the fight, you don't use your sword, you just use your fists and boulders in the arena. So yeah, I think with that fight, depending on which version, there's some parts that are good, some parts that are bad, depending on which version you play. So yeah, from the Wind Waker is Mulgera. Now Mulgera is similar to Twin Mold in that it's basically this giant flying type enemy, and it kind of reminds me of one of the later bosses in Shadow of the Colossus. I don't remember its name, but it's the giant worm-looking enemy that you fight, I think, towards the end of the game. And yeah, with Morgera, it's a really interesting boss. I remember I didn't like it at first because I found it to be a bit annoying, but over time I think I come to get used to it. I think the boss as a whole, because it's really cool, and I do like how it's like you're the size of like an ant compared to it. And I do really like its theme song, or the boss theme that you get to hear when you're fighting against it. And I do really like the Hyrule Warriors version. That's probably the best version of the theme, because it's like it's basically this jazzier song, or jazzier version of the theme. So yeah, from Twilight Princess is Star-Lord. Now this boss has two phases, and both are very, very different, and they both require the use of the spinner that you get in Arbiter's Crowns. And the boss as a whole is very, very fun, because in the first phase you basically see its body, or the remains of its body, and it's basically covered or trapped in sand, and the way that you damage to it is to hit the spine so that it can fall down, and you have to avoid all of these reanimated zombie corpses that come out from the sand, as well as having to avoid these spinners that are on the rails that you use the spinner on. And then in the second phase, you have to use not only the center pillar that allows you to gain an elevation to hit Star-Lord, but also use the walls as well that are opposite it, because you have to avoid all of Star-Lord's attacks. And yeah, this is a really fun fight, and I do like how the way that you have to fight it, because when you first enter the room, you see Zant, and he basically brings out the sword and basically just plunges it into Star-Lord's head, and that reanimates it. So yeah, I do like the connection between like how it's done, and yeah, I think as a whole, this is a really, really interesting test of like your reflexes when it comes to whenever it's like going through the sandy part, trying to avoid all the spikes and the zombie corpses, as well as all of Star-Lord's attacks. And it's just imagine how this boss would look like if it had all of its like muscles and its skin and stuff like that, in terms of what it could look like, because it kind of looks half lizard-like, half dragon-like. Well, I know dragons are reptiles, but imagine what kind of monster it was before it became skeleton. From Skyward Sword is Koloktos. Now I know that Koloktos is the memeable or the most obvious answer for Skyward Sword when it comes to bosses, but I really do like Koloktos, because it's just this giant robot that basically comes to life through the power of Girahim. And I think out of all the bosses that I've fought, whether that's in the Zelda series, or in a Final Fantasy game, or in any other game that I've played, Koloktos is the only boss that keeps his weak spot covered, and in both phases. And I don't think you can say that with any other boss when it comes to weak spots, because a lot of bosses, you just hit them a couple of times and then they're dead, so you defeated them. There might be a particular thing like a giant eyeball, or a particular weapon that they might use to deal damage to that, and stuff like that. But with Koloktos, I do like how it keeps its weak spot covered, because in the first phase, he has two hands. Well, he's got multiple hands, but he uses two of them to cover his weak spot. And then in the second phase, he brings out like I think 6 swords that he uses, and then he keeps his weak spot covered by using a gate. And that's so cool, and I do like how in both phases he uses different type of attack. So in the first phase, he basically just brings his hands down to the ground to hit Link, and then in the second phase he can use his sword as well as summon cursed goblins. But the cursed goblins aren't really there; they're only like there for like a second until you just hit your sword, and then they're taken out quite easily. And yeah, I think Crocodile is just a really, really cool boss, and I do like how he can just, with his swords, he can just swing them about, and even though it's not that tough, it can be somewhat of a challenge if you want to try and take out Crocodile's feet when you have one of his swords. So yeah, Crocodile as a whole is just a really, really fun boss to fight off against. So yeah. From Breath of the Wild is Thunderblight Ganon. Now, I'm not going to be saying Monk Master Kaz, because that's part of a DLC, and even though it kind of moves the story along a bit, it doesn't really move the story along a whole lot when compared to the base game. So when it comes to like bosses from Breath of the Wild, I knew that I was mainly going to be talking about one of the main bosses. So yeah, that's kind of like my reasoning for choosing one of the main bosses. And with Thunderblight Ganon, out of all of the other Blights, it's probably the most tough one to fight off against, because it's the smallest one, so that means it's the faster one. So all of the Blights all have their own gimmicks. Fireblight Ganon, he can turn his sword on fire. With Wind Blight, he can summon tornadoes. With Water Blight, he can create ice cubes and raise the water level in Varuta. But with Thunderblight Ganon, not only can he go super fast, but he can also summon lightning. So around the halfway part, he can have both his sword and his shield become lightning. So even if he attacks you, you will be electrocuted, and you might drop your weapons and stuff. So you might have to like use like rubber armor or something that can deflect or be immune to his electric attacks. And I do like how during that second phase, he can summon these metallic rods, and he can use like magnesis to your advantage to get him to hit himself by using his lightning attacks. And yeah, this is a real big challenge, but especially if you're like got like a few hearts, let's say like 6-7 hearts, so like and you've got like semi-decent armor and weapon stuff, but like as a whole, Thunderblight Ganon is a real tough boss. And at first, I think on multiple retries it does get easier, but I remember the first time I fought off against Thunderblight Ganon, and I remember when Alberta said, "This one's fast," as soon as he said that, Thunderblight Ganon just zipped towards me and just hit me in like 1 or 2 hits, and I was like, that's really cool. And I do hope that in future games we get to see bosses like that, where we have to like prepare ourselves. So yeah. And from Tears of the Kingdom is Colgera. Now this is probably, out of all the dungeon bosses in Tears of the Kingdom, probably the best boss, or the best dungeon boss, because of how it's hyped up. Because when you first hear about Rito Village, you hear that it's all covered in the vastness of snow. It's like there's a whole like snowstorm and stuff like that. And then when you go to the temple, or the Wind Temple where Colgera is, you kind of like see that there's this giant cloud surrounding it, and then as soon as you finish all of the terminal stuff and open the area where Colgera is, he just comes out of the dungeon, out of the main hole he's in, and he's just massive. It's basically just, I think, a cooler version of Twin Mold and Molgera, where with Colgera, he's just this giant bug-like boss, and it's so cool. And I do like how he can like summon tornadoes, he can disappear 1 second and reappear beneath you, and he can use his ice spikes to hit you and stuff like that. And I do like how this boss is quite cool, because you can either dive through the ice that's covering his weak spots, or use a real bow and arrow with like a fire elemental thing attached, like a fire wing or a choo-choo flame jelly, and just hit it from beneath. And that's really cool. It's really cool. I think it's cool because it really calls to like the whole uniqueness of how you fight bosses in Tears of the Kingdom. So yeah, and I mainly use the diving technique just because I think it's, for me, easier, and I think it's a lot cooler than just using arrows, because I think the arrow technique is cool. I just don't think it's as fun to use against Pulgera when you can just dive into his sweet spots. So yeah, and plus I feel like it's more satisfying to do the dive. So yeah, so that's been my list of my favourite bosses from every 3D Zelda game. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.